suggest to do, actually, all things said and done, what would be worth doing? Has anyone watched the film, the documentary, I should say, The Wizard of the Desert? Okay, so it's really worth watching The Wizard of the Desert if you get a chance to. It's by Alexander Vesely. It's really, really good if you get a chance to watch it. I think you'll enjoy it. And that sort of gives you a sort of flavour for Milton Erickson and his work. Another book that's useful to read as well is My Voice Will Go With You. It's the teaching tales of Milton H. Erickson. And it's really, really good. Sidney Rosen is one of the authors, and it's really useful too. And you sort of read it and you get a sort of insight into his work. And also Ernie Rossi has put together some good stuff in years gone by. And they're sort of like case studies and seminars. And if you go on Amazon, you sort of type in Ernie Rossi, and you'll sort of get an idea for some of the case studies. And they're really fascinating to get an insight into Erickson's work. But obviously people have written books, and some are better than others. Some will resonate for you more than others, and it's entirely what works for you. But I think watching the Wizard of the Desert is quite nice. It's quite relaxing in the sense that it's easy watching, so to speak, and it gives you a really, really nice insight into his work, and people talk about his work, who he's influenced, and it's really, really fascinating. But the story behind Erickson's quite interesting, and I think, and this is sort of my perspective and my perception, is it begins his journey when he's born into a farming community in Nevada, and he doesn't speak, I believe, until about 4 years of age. Okay, they go on to say he had dyslexia, or obviously had dyslexia, and tone deafness, and colorblind. Okay, when he was 17 years of age, he contracted polio. So polio obviously is a very debilitating condition, and the doctor suggested that he may have only 24 hours to live. And the story says that he overheard that that was said to his mum or his parents, whatever, and that would have been very traumatic in itself. But all things said and done, he was severely debilitated for a year after that, or thereabouts. Now, he'd suffered all these challenges, from early on in life. And if you watch what he says and listen to what he says, he talks about how that was instrumental in him becoming who he was. And certainly from the point of view of becoming a therapist, and a very, very good therapist, if not one of the best or the best therapist, he talks about how these challenges would shape him as a person. Now, we all have challenges, and they all sculpt us to a certain degree. But equally, what Erickson seemed to do is he'd utilize his challenges and sort of frame them in a positive way. And you think when he gets to his 50s, he gets this severe bout of polio again. And he's obviously in a lot of pain, severe pain. But what does he do? He sort of learns from that, and he helps others with pain relief. So one of the areas, and one of the things that's worth reading, if you get a chance to read the Collected Papers of Milton Erickson Volume 2, the Collected Papers of Milton Erickson Volume 2, he discusses in those papers his approaches to sensory alteration and pain control in hypnotic alteration of sensory, perceptual, and psychophysiological processes. So in one sense, we can look at it this way. So, for example, you might be walking around or walking down the street, or walking on a country walk, you might be walking around a lake, you might have a pebble in your shoe, but you don't notice it until you get home. Or you might be doing the gardening, and you get inside and you sort of notice all these little cuts on your arm that you didn't notice before. Or perhaps you're talking to somebody and you're deep in conversation and the phone goes, and you go and answer the phone, you go back to speaking to that person, you don't recall what you were saying. You sort of, in that respect. So, from that point of view, Erickson was better placed than probably anybody to administer hypnosis from pain relief, because he's in such pain himself, and he found ways to manage it. But also, he continued to teach until late into his 70s. Many people, and practice as well. And polio had obviously taken its toll on him, but he was still going to influence many people, the likes of Jay Haley, Margaret Mead, Bateson, inspired, you could argue, the developers NLP. NLP being modelling excellence. Well, who do they model? Well, who do you model if you're going to model effective therapists? Well, you're going to model the best or the people who are getting the best results. And Erickson was one of those. And NLP models the likes of Satire, Fritz Perls, but Erickson, from the point of view of he was doing what not many other people were doing in the world of therapy. And obviously, with Erickson being a psychiatrist too, in psychiatry, how do you think psychiatry views hypnosis at that point? Things have changed a lot in psychiatry, by the way. Things have changed dramatically. Some of my lecturers at uni have a psychiatry background, and I can tell you they've changed considerably. Some talk about mindfulness, some talk about hypnosis. But back then, what do you think their perception would have been of hypnosis?
Like it's out there.
Precisely. Huge stigma. Even to the point that they may have even banned people from psychiatry for using it because there is a stigma. And there still is now a stigma around hypnosis, not as much as it used to be. And Erickson was one of the people for me who helped overcome that stigma in hypnosis, because he was getting these results and teaching people how he was doing it. Now, he was unorthodox as a psychiatrist, but he's also a family doctor too. Now, you read his case studies on what he was doing and how he'd go about doing it was quite fascinating, because at that point there, when you think about it, psychiatry and psychology, I think a really, really useful film to see if you've seen it before or read the book. I actually read the book before the film, ironically, is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Anyone ever seen that before with Jack Nicholson? And I find it really fascinating because that's at a point when there's so many changes in the system. So many changes, the advent of medication, the desocialization, so many radical changes. And you see in the film, the electric shock treatment, you see in the film lobotomy, and people sort of look back at these things and think, wow, look at what they used to do then. But that was the best they knew then. So we build upon each other's work. And Erickson comes along and he's got these different strategies. And the school of the day was change could take a long time, if you ever did change. Some schools of therapy would say, well, actually, you are likely not to change. You get introspection. So Erickson's unconscious mind was different to Freud's unconscious mind. Freud's unconscious mind was more like the dustbin of all suppression and repression, where Erickson was benevolent. The unconscious mind had this capability. And if you look at NLP, part of the development of NLP anyway was an attempt to decode Erickson's processes and strategies, and a set of processes and techniques, which you'll see and which you've no doubt seen in the form of some of the language patterns. But that's another story for another day. But the point being, what I find quite fascinating here is that, okay, so he's got a different take on change. Now, we're going to explore some of the ways that he would do that. Now, if we think of Erickson, and he was effective at stimulating realizations. So how do you stimulate a realization? Well, for an experience, one would think to a certain point. Now, I suppose in one sense, who's ever watched a comedian? Anyone ever watched a comedian? Okay. Now, the way they convey information, the comedian, is it informative? Do they give you a series of instructions on how to laugh or when to laugh? No. You listen and watch the comedian, and you have an orientation towards his or her humour, and then there's a punchline, so to speak. So, okay, you go to the comedian and you are in an experience. And from the point that Erickson was not indirect, his processes were indirect. He wasn't indirect. As a vehicle to communicating his concepts, when he was communicating concepts, he was in the therapeutic state orientating towards someone changing. So, okay, the process might be indirect, storytell, metaphor, but he was not indirect. And he'd communicate in a way to elicit a hypnotic state in the other person to activate a concept in the other person. So how would he do that? Well, tasks, metaphor, simile, story, signification, gesture, ambiguity, psychological level communication, hypnotic language, presuppositional language. So if you get a chance to read some of his papers, you'll sort of see, and it's quite fascinating the way he would go about doing things. And I kind of think, well, his experience would have been a big factor in that. And, you know, if you sort of watch the documentary, the docufilm, The Wisdom of the Desert, you'll see some of his experiences. And we all have these experiences in life that start to shape our reality in one sense. And I think that it's a sort of cocktail, isn't it, of experience that we sort of go through. But you look at the orientation of who you are. So these patterns. So by creating a reference experience, the client can achieve a transformation. Who's ever had a realization? A client becomes more adaptive, more effective in their behavior, a more conducive identity. Which film do I talk about a lot in my other seminars?
Scrooge.
Precisely. And you look at Scrooge, and so why do I talk about Scrooge? Because the experience stimulates our realization. Scrooge, in the film A Christmas Carol, he has a stimulation of a realization. He gets visited by these ghosts of the present, the past, the future. And sort of cutting a long story short, he has a realization. But the point being, experiential, so you reorganize the resourceful states and restructure your thought process and perceptions. So you go from this maladaptive to adaptive. And I think, from my perspective, is reaching deeper in the evolution brain of function, accessing existing resourceful states. So I think what Erickson would do different to anybody else, at least most of the people, at least at that time, was almost normalize the person's behavior in the sense that, you know, the brain is doing what the brain is meant to do based on that situation. Now, there's been a lot of water under the bridge since then, technologically. And I think now you can literally put the argument of nature and nurture to bed. It's salient. We know now that it's genes, environment, correlation. You get these genes, you experience the environment. The environment consists of multi-factors. Nutrition, exposure to chemicals, many things. You know, the environment, psychosocial, the family you're born into. So all these things have an influence on us. But equally, one experience can change your identity. And the experience that Scrooge had was a visit from the ghosts. Okay? And that changed his identity. How you define who you are impacts your behavior. So, okay, we know that Scrooge had these experiences that had a major influence in the way he was. Okay? The suppression. He sort of finds work as an outlet and sees that as a coping strategy. But equally going forward, he deep down inside wants to be more social. But fear, one would think. The fear of the unknown. But a reference experience can impact our identity, our beliefs, our behavior. Okay? So, Erickson communicating a concept. Now, the concept would orientate the client towards changing their states. So you change your states. You know, Scrooge was different state in the morning than he was when he went to bed in the evening. He went to bed in the evening. What was his state? like?
Grumpy.
Precisely.
Isolated.
What was it in the morning?
Happy, gregarious.
Precisely. Exactly. And that's not to say he's going to be that way all the time. But equally, what else has he changed? His perspective. His perspective in the evening was different to the morning. What was his perspective in the evening? His perception. His perspective on things.
I'd say his life was hard, harsh.
And there is an element of truth in that to a certain point, but equally, does it mean that we don't find joy for ourselves as well as in this life? So it changes his mood, emotions, beliefs, identity. He's no longer the Scrooge he was. And this was for an experience. And I talk a lot about my own journey working as a therapist coach and creating experiences for people. How instrumental that is in change. Because you create an experience for people, and you know, that for me can sculpt their reality. So whether the example I use, you know, when I was sort of doing the BBC Radio Manchester and sort of Margaret in the 60s wanted to reduce in weight, and she tried to reduce before, I thought I'd do a different approach, a less than conventional approach. And the approach would be get her to engage socially again, because after she'd retired or semi-retired, that was one thing she wasn't doing anymore. So I felt, okay, if you're socializing and you're out there and you're doing things like swimming and seeing friends and so on and so forth, then what are you not doing? Well, you're not going to eat as much as you would do from a comfort point of view, but also what's significant there from a social point of view, you start to feel better, one would think. So I gave her a goal, and the goal was an intentional goal. The goal was for her to go swimming again. Why swimming? Because she hadn't swum since 8 years of age, because she had an incident in the pool. Now I believe at 64, if she could break that barrier and go swimming, it would have a cascade of implications. And the cascade would be that if you get back in the swimming pool, would be, it would be social, but then what would that do to the belief she has around weight reduction? Well, if I can do that, I can do this. So there was a method in the madness, and I thought, okay, that could be one goal we got, but what she should do is socialise. She talked about the benefits of doing that. So that was the goal that I set her, as well as the weight reduction goals that she had. And amongst other things, she also ran for the first time in many, many years, and she sort of changed her life dramatically, which is quite ironic. On the last show that we did, the transcript is probably somewhere out there, on the last show, she didn't draw attention to her weight, albeit she'd got to the weight she wanted to be. Her life was different. She'd been away to Spain for the first time in many years, first vacation for a long time. She started running. She had a life back. And for me, creating an experience, because these sort of experiences sculpt our reality, can change our life. So one slight degree of variation. And you'll know, because you're such a proficient man in psychology, just one noticeable difference. So if I put my hand out and I put a rock on here, I might not notice very much, but if I put 2 rocks, 3 rocks, that slight degree of variation can take a whole different, location. So the experience has changed things. And I've mentioned on several occasions, some of the people I've worked with over time, it's sort of giving them an experience to do a task, going forward. Now, if you listen to human beings, they're storytellers. So they'll tell you all you need to know. If you sort of take a step back and you listen to the way they speak to human beings, you'll know that the narrative. So the narrative, okay? And what does the narrative tell you about that person? Their identity, their beliefs, their values, their capability. It tells you many things. Ultimately tells you about their beliefs, their storytellers. So when a client comes to you, what do they do? What do they tell you? What does the client tell you when a client comes along and tells you about a problem that they had? They tell you a story around that. Okay, to tell their narrative. Okay, you can elicit a series of distortions that they have, or perceptions they have. Now they might have worked for a bit, so why they could never go swimming again, why they think they can't reduce in weight, why they think they can't get that job, why they think they can't get that partner, why they think they can't do this, that and the other. And there may be some truth in what they present you with, yet in saying that, if someone has a goal, they could be the barriers in the way of the goal, in the way. So the woman I help start presenting again, the beliefs, the rigidity about presenting it and not being able to go back to do it again, and why she couldn't go back to doing it again. Adamant. Okay. Now, if you could have solved the issue, would she bother coming to see me for? So she knows what the problem is. But why would she come and see me if she could solve her own issue? What's the point? I mean, does she know the answers? Do people know that smoking's bad for them? Pretty much. If they want to give up, why can't they give up?
Feel as if they can't.
Could be a feeling. So, okay, I shouldn't eat that ice cream in the evening. Is it as easy as that for most people? The compulsion, the behaviour, do people choose certain things in their life so they know certain people around them aren't good for them to be around, and they struggle. So from a point of view, didactically you might know the answer, but are there plenty of books out there, self-help books out there? There certainly are, there are loads. There's self-help books for self-help books these days. So we know things a little bit deeper than that, aren't they, in that respect. So, things can be a bit deeper than what they seem in one regard. So you can give everyone a book and that can sort of give them some information. But what doesn't the book do? It doesn't tailor the approach for the person. Everyone's different. I think utilization was a huge thing that Erickson would do. He'd find resources in people that were really, really useful. But equally, all things said and done, he'd find virtue in the fault and normalize the situation rather than trivialize, or rather than think, well, the person's broken in that respect. So, unfortunately, I was going to put these slides up for you. They doesn't want to play ball. But anyway, who needs the slides anyway? So, in one sense, we can sort of tap into the unconscious mind. Okay, when we think of the unconscious mind, what can we think of in terms of the unconscious mind? Well, think for a moment. You're breathing. Now, are you telling yourself to breathe? It happens automatically. Your heart's beating. Are you telling yourself heartbeat? Okay, your temperature's adjusted itself. Isn't it fascinating to think how homeostatically we make these adjustments? What happens if you go to a place of high altitude? What do you think happens? And what does your body do eventually? It regulates itself, so you can get more oxygen into the body and process that. So the body knows what to do. It's quite fascinating. If you cut yourself, what happens automatically without you even realizing it? Do you will the cut to heal? Precisely. If you have a flu or a virus, the body automatically, and these are all processes outside your awareness. You don't tell your body to do it. It does it outside your awareness, so to speak. And I think it's quite fascinating in terms of the way the body does that. in many respects. Now, what I want you to think of now is from the point of view of hypnosis, and we talked about Erickson breaking that stigma to a certain degree, because you've got the sort of more conventional way of hypnosis, and it's quite effective for many people, but you've got more of an indirect way too, which we're going to touch on today and tomorrow. So it's almost like an invitation rather than induction. Now, I've mentioned before that hypnosis has its renaissance around about the Second World War, when they were using anesthetic. Okay, and I think some of the terminology made its way across to hypnosis. So when you think induction, are you really inducting anybody into trance? It's more of an invitation. So in adverse to sort of standing over somebody and reading from the script, so we can think inviting someone into trance, inviting them, okay? And there's many hypnotic qualities that we have. There's many hypnotic qualities that you can think of. What are some things that have hypnotic qualities that you guys can think of? What are some things that have hypnotic qualities that you can think of?
Oh, you mean like if you're doing
Yeah.
something, well,
What?
almost anything, watching TV, sometimes reading a book, jogging.
Could be a
walking.
sunset.
Yeah, the same.
Yeah. So they've got hypnotic qualities. You see a beautiful sunset somewhere, magnificent sunset somewhere in the distance, wherever that might be. When you sort of get really absorbed in the sunset, and you sort of see it, the beautiful sunrise or sunset with lands. Absolutely. Or you're reading a book, you're reading one of my books. Yeah. Not anybody else.
Put it down, Jim.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Or you could be reading a different book. You could be reading Harry Potter.
Messages while you're reading it.
Exactly. You could be reading a different book. You could be reading. Perhaps you could be reading. This is not going to play ball, so forget it. We don't need it anyway. You could be reading Harry Potter. You could be reading 50 Shades of Grey. But people read, don't they? And they go into this everyday trance. It's naturalistic in adverse to you preparing and deciding to induce the person. It's naturalistic. So what you can do is you link everyday experiences. You link everyday experiences which have hypnotic qualities to the solution the person's looking for, because you'll know in the first part, because of a well-formed outcome. The person decides what their goal is. Okay, and we can orientate them towards that. So we take a natural experience that you have or have had, and we can link that to the solution. Well, why would you do that? Because you're in a more receptive state. But you can also think from another point of view, when you get absorbed in states. So you could be road rage, and you get so consumed by it. Or it could be someone sends you a text or an email, and it festers, and you get into that sort of state as well. So from the point of view of getting into a state, a more receptive state for change, we can think alpha, the alpha state. Beta being awake, normal, conscious. We're not going to be very receptive at that point. The change, consciously aware. There's many things fighting for you. Conscious. We can think alpha, where you sort of relax, calm, meditation, creative visualization. Theta even goes a bit deeper than that. Okay, the brain slows down, and one way to describe it is, when you get up out of bed in the morning, you feel a bit you're sort of coming around, or in the evening. That's a useful state to be in for change, because you can bypass the critical factor. That's when you're consciously awake or aware. So we can do that. Now, I want you to think for a moment, as we sort of go along on our journey, a time when you felt really calm and peaceful. Can everyone think of a time they felt really calm and peaceful? It could have been a vacation, it could have been a family gathering, it could have been one or the other above. Can you think of a time you felt really calm? And as you think of a time you felt really, really calm, okay, one that's useful to you and relevant to you. Just notice where you were, what you saw, what you heard. Okay, just taking some time to reflect on an experience. And as you do that, we can start to think how being indirect can be useful. Well, why is being indirect useful? Because think of a horse that's going really fast in one way. Okay? If you try and maneuver the horse to go a different way, you get more resistant, don't you? So what you do is you can sort of ride in the direction it's going and steer it across to bypass that resistance. A bit like, say, for example, God forbid if you ever get caught up in one of them sort of currents in the sea. What's the worst thing you can do to get caught up in a current in the sea?
Swim against it.
Precisely. And if you swim against it, what happens?
You get tired, you get worn out.
Precisely. So the logical thing to do would be to go with it. And it'll take you all the way across the Atlantic and then you'll swim out. But the point being is that we can start looking at components to hypnosis in this respect, is association. So what you did there is you associated and connected to an experience. And how did it feel to connect that experience? Yeah, precise. And you disconnected from a different experience. So from this point of view, let's think of it this way. From connecting to an experience. Let's think you connect to an experience. Now, if one connects to an experience where they feel possibly not very competent or a little bit overwhelming, how do they start to feel? If you were to go to a place where you couldn't speak the language, you'd lost your wallet, you didn't know anybody, how would you feel? How would you feel, Kathy, if you went to a place? How would you feel? How would you feel then if you were transported back to a place where you knew everybody and you were familiar with people and comfortable? So you connect to an experience, okay? An experience that's useful to you. One of the things that's quite useful too, another point being, is to help the person connect to a resourceful state, okay? Now, if you're resourceful in a certain situation, how do you feel?
Confident.
Precisely. If I tell you to do something you've never done before, how do you feel?
Unsure.
Precise. So we can use a resourceful state and use that as a building block. Okay? Use that as a building block that can be quite useful. So what we associate to, what we dissociate from, what we connect to, what we disconnect from. In the case of Margaret, who had a fear of swimming after 56 years, what she associated to in the swimming pool was, what do you think? Before the point of us doing the work, the change work. Precisely. And what she disconnected from was her resourceful state. Now, what we connect to is, it's almost like a piggyback, where you sort of let that fear, anxiety is at that point, and we can sort of work in a way where extend the comfort zone, and that could be the ramifications and implications of swimming again. So if I go swimming again, I'll go on holiday to Spain for the first time in many years. I'll go every Tuesday morning a social group, and so on and so forth. Okay, so, but what we can use as a building block are things that she's overcome in the past challenges. Because you overcome one thing, you can overcome that. So what are we doing? We're getting into more resourceful states. Okay? She feels stuck. So you interrupt the pattern. and you then introduce a new pattern. Because one thing we are as human beings is we are very pattern orientated. So you observe the pattern. Because if someone does something once, they do it twice, they do it 3 times, there's a pattern emerging. So you can change behaviour or how you react to events and information that's constantly coming in. Now, if you look at art, is art a science, or communication is best conceived as an art in this respect than a science? Okay, I mean, we all can see one picture, and unfortunately I can't seem to bring the picture up because this isn't play ball, but we all see one picture. Do we all have the same reaction to that picture? Okay, it conveys a meaning to you. Okay, so what else can change mood in people? Look at music. The beautiful thing about song and music is that what's great about song and music for me, and the wonder of it, is you can watch a film more than once. With a song, listen to it many times. It's amazing. What does a song do? It conveys emotion, feeling, and you can go back and listen to a song so many times. Okay, and it might mean one thing one point and something different, but it can alter your mood, your change, the mood. So when we think schema, you think association. So you think fire, hot, that's your hand back in fire again. Okay, but from the point of view of schema, if you haven't experienced, you're understanding what a kitchen is, can you change that? It's solidified in your brain. Okay, it's there. So you know what a kitchen is, and you know what to expect in the kitchen as a general point of view, but can that be changed? Well, not necessarily. Does it have to be changed? Not necessarily. Does our appraisal can be changed? So if you think swimming pool at ease of age, experience, well, I'm not going back there again because of this experience, well, it's okay to think that way. Most people would based on that experience. But now, a lot of water's gone under the bridge. We can sort of move forward and maybe reappraise the situation, because memories aren't fixed. Okay, memories are our interpretation of things, but what do memories carry too? Emotion. So you might not remember much about the holiday you had 5 years ago. You might remember the row you had more significantly. You might remember an experience that you had on that holiday, good or bad, the emotion. More often than not, it's a negative one, because we could argue evolutionary history, the brain is designed to keep you alive and look for dangers. So Shakespeare, if you look at his work, he talks about how two people will see the same thing but have different feelings about it. So we could both appraise things differently. But the indirect communication could be based on, people say sometimes the quickest way for A to B is to be direct. And it is, in certain situations and circumstances. Where behaviour is concerned, sometimes being direct is useful, sometimes it's not. Because if the person could have solved their problem, why are they seeing you anyway? So they're coming to you to help stop smoking, cessation smoking, and you're telling them the answer. They go to a group for weight reduction, they know the answer, eat high nutritional foods, exercise more. Then why aren't they damn doing it? So the quickest way for A to B is a straight line. Great. But it's not as easy as that. So we've got to be practical. We'd have no problems in the world if we sort of thought logically. From what we can do is soften the rigidity that the person has, and we can be indirect, which is quite useful. And we're going to explore ways to do that. And prior to going to lunch, I'm going to introduce you to a few ways of doing that, which is quite useful. So, okay, one thing I learnt on my own journey that the level of indirectness that you use in proportion to the resources you've got. Now that's sort of coming from Jeff, who took on the Erickson Institute in Arizona, one of my many teachers. But the point being, and my understanding of it was, okay, you get so much indirectness, you get so much resistance, you then, to peel away that resistance, you are indirect in proportion to the resistance you get. So if, for example, you recommend the client come and see me, they know what I'm all about, okay? I can be a bit more direct. If you recommend another client and they've gone to see 20 hypnotherapists, 10 psychotherapists, 10 coaches, and nothing's ever worked, are they going to be more resistant? Absolutely. So I might be more indirect. So indirect, where I might say in a group of people a message to one person, but it might be directed to somebody else, or vice versa. And I suppose it's a bit like, say, for example, I don't know, think back to your, early days, and perhaps at college, university, or when you were going out raving in the clubs of Liverpool, Manchester, or Spain, or Ibiza, and you might meet someone, and you might say to that person, okay, would you like to come back for a coffee? Or would you like to come back to see my record collection? No, I've got records now. But were you might have had that in mind, but you might have something else in mind. So you're saying one thing but means something different. Does that make sense? So, okay, we're going to look at a couple of things that you can do. So we can start with language, and there's a series of patterns in the manual you'll see that we'll go through throughout the day, and we'll work on these things. And we look at permissive, we can think of language. Okay, so how can I be indirect with language? So one thing I can ask you to do, and I've asked you to do throughout the course on several occasions, is to close your eyes. Now I'm not suggesting you close your eyes now. In a subtle way, what word do I use before I ask you to close your eyes? Is there a word that I use?
Perhaps.
Exactly. The observant man. This doesn't miss a trick, this bloke. Why would I use that for?
That's it's more permissive. It's not direct.
Exactly. So if I say, Kathy, close your eyes, or precisely, perhaps you could close your eyes more subtly rather than close your eyes. So directive with a soft invitation and pause, then what's Kathy more likely to do? Okay. So perhaps, Kathy, you'd like to buy my book. and leave a 12-star review. I don't know when you'll be ready, but
You never will.
yeah. And the point being is, we sort of extend that to, and we look at a presuppositional link, and we talked about some of the communication Erickson would use. He'd use presuppositional language. Okay, so what's presuppositional language? So since something undeniable is happening, link it to the deniable. So, okay, since you're sitting in the chair, you can close your eyes. So what's undeniable about that statement? Okay, what could you challenge? Close your eyes. Okay, because you've come to see me, if the person comes to see you, you're looking to improve. So what's undeniable? Okay, what could they challenge?
They want to do something.
Yeah, so the key thing is really the presuppositional link. It's in proportion to the undeniable truth that you're presenting the person. So if I said to Andy, at lunchtime, if you go to the shop, if he tells us he's going to the shop, it's pretty much undeniable truth he's going. If I said, Andy, could you get me a chocolate bar? It's in proportion to him going out and doing what he's doing. So he might say yes. There's a better chance he'll say yes. If I say to him, Andy, if you go to the shop, while you're there, can you go to the bank and steal £1 million for me? It's a bit out of proportion, isn't it? So, please, then he's going to go and do it and blame me.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, here we go. I've set myself up now, haven't I? It's all recorded now. So when he comes back and we've got the whole... But
Just
don't do it.
confirmation
Yeah.
of what you know.
It was just part of the course, Andy. Okay, let's stick with the chocolate bar for now. Or give me a lottery trick if you want to. Okay. But the point being is that, okay, so it's in proportion. And one thing to think about the precept link is quite powerful, and we'll talk about why it's really powerful as we go along on the course. It's really, really powerful. Misspeaking as well is quite useful too, because what does misspeaking do? It interrupts the pattern. You're expecting to hear one thing and you hear something completely different. It's a pattern interrupt. Okay? And that's quite useful because the person's so adamant of what the issue is. Okay? And by saying something they're not expecting to hear, okay, and you find a way to interrupt the pattern, that doesn't just be language. Okay, that can be a gesture, it can be a metaphor, it can be something they're not expecting to do. And you know, many years ago when I was seeing a client and she'd come to see me for anxiety, and she'd come along to see me for anxiety, and she'd been to see many other people before she came and see me. She was expecting probably the same old spiel, and the first thing I did was woo in front of her face. She was like, "What the heck?" It interrupted the pattern. It was like, wow, you know, it kind of broke that state. Okay, and I've been known to do things like that, and it breaks the state, doesn't it? And I'm not suggesting you go back to work and you do that. You can if you want to. You know, there's a guy at the traffic lights the other day who had road rage. I went, yeah, why not? Why not? You know, but the point being is that. So we'll sort of go into this in more detail tomorrow. Not that or that, but the person's expecting to hear one thing. So you'll know from Shakespeare he'd have what they call neologisms, and they were like words he'd create, a newly turned phrase. So you know, it's not commonly used in everyday life, but it's formally accepted as mainstream language. So it would triggers the brain area related negativity. So, you know, you're expecting to hear one thing but something different. So the example might be chillax. That doesn't mean anything, but the person hears that. So we can think of neologism, quite a useful thing that you can use. Create these words. The yes set, as well as, you've come across the yes set before? The yes set being a series of techniques by which a series of universally true statements are used, and they're delivered in an explicit way in the agreement pattern. So for example, I could say, can you feel your feet on the floor? Okay. Can you hear your heartbeat? Can you notice your breathing? Yes, yes, yes. When I give an additional instruction, what are you more likely to do?
Comply.
Precisely. Okay. And as you notice your foot on the floor, your back on the chair, you begin to feel more calm. Now, which one of those statements is not necessarily true? You begin to feel more calm, but that's where I want to pace you to go, and we'll talk about pacing and leading. So the point being, you know, one wants you to be more calm, but it's congruent and ethical to where you want to go. If you come to see me for a session, and the most receptive state you'll be in to achieve the goal is to be in a place where you are calm, you're more likely to go with it. And you see it in sales a lot. They use the yes set. They're probably not even aware they're doing it sometimes. You know, and they might say a series of questions you're going to say yes to, and then they'll ask you to sign on the dotted line. And then they even put a double bind in. You don't have to pay now, you can pay later. So on and so forth, which we'll go into more detail, and you see it a lot. So you might get a call from your phone provider or a different phone provider and say, okay, the things that you are likely to be probably frustrated about or and sort of to create that compliance. Okay, so the momentum of the repetition, so you don't give it full consideration. So the questions by the salesperson are quite innocuous. So the answer can only be yes. And then they slide in. So would you like to buy this? And the person, without thinking about it, agrees. Okay? You use a lot of awareness predicates. Indicates you have some knowledge about the topic. So I know you know what you know. As you begin to remember, you imagine. Have you explored? You are aware of your feet on the floor. So I draw attention to the conscience. Because at the point of me not mentioning it, you probably weren't aware of it. But now you're aware of the pen in your hand. So I drew it to your conscience. You're aware of your earrings. You're aware of your watch. Okay? Because we can, before we sort of break for lunch, the causal link. We can use and as the basic link. And as you begin, and as you begin to wonder, and imagine, remember, simply state the facts, what's true, and you want people to assume. So it's a pace and lead. So what does a linkage do? Well, as and creates links between words, a nice flow. Create a nice, smooth flow for the listener. Okay? It's a nice, gentle flow. You're less likely to challenge. And on that note, let's sort of consolidate the learning thus far before we break for lunch. Perhaps you'd like to close your eyes. And as you close your eyes, you begin to notice the back against your chair. And as you notice your back against the chair, you hear the ticking sounds in the background. And as you notice the ticking sounds in the background, perhaps it takes you back to a time in your life you felt calm and peaceful. And as you go back to that time, it may have been a vacation. It may have been a holiday. Perhaps it was time with friends and family. Or it may have been one or the other, all of the above. Fully immerse yourself in that experience and as you see the colours, the sounds, the feelings. And as you become aware of the feelings, perhaps you notice any taste and smells. And as you notice what's around you, you feel calm and peaceful. And as you feel calm and peaceful, you reflect on this experience and you see yourself like seeing a screen, and you look at the screen and you think about the first time you learned to walk or talk or ride a bike. And as you reflect on the first time you learned to walk, talk or ride a bike, you have a realization that happened unconsciously. And when you learned to walk, you fell, you got back up. And when you learned to talk, you watched the people around you and you mimicked. And when you learned to ride a bike, and you take those resources and learnings. And I know you might be feeling a little bit confused, and perhaps there's a lot of information to take on board. But equally, sometimes you know, or you don't know what you're going to say until you say what you say. And when you say what you say, in the depths of your unconscious mind, you know all the resources are there. Just like at this point, you're not thinking about driving a car, but you could go in the car and drive. Or perhaps you're not thinking about making a cup of coffee, but you know you could do that. And all the things you can do that you relegate to the unconscious. And all the resources you have that relegate to the unconscious. And take a moment now to draw upon these resources, knowing at one time you couldn't speak the language you speak. and you learned. When you think back to when you learnt what you learnt, some of the language we're covering now, if you can do it then, you can learn this in your own time, in your own pace. And you didn't need to learn all the things that you learnt when you learnt it. And you don't need to learn all the things. You learn them in your own time. And you might learn them now, and you might learn them next week, you might learn it in a month. And you learn them in your own pace. And the things you'll learn are what you need to learn. We need to learn it. And just breathe naturally, normally. And as you breathe naturally, normally, in your own time, in one's own pace, gradually, and you can hear the sound in the background. Perhaps it reminds you of a time when you were peaceful and calm, and air conditioning in the background, or the kettle in the background, and getting ready to start your day, refreshed, alert, revitalized. And in your own time, in your own pace, just gradually come back to the here and now when you want to come back. Okay.